With this deal, the UK joins the United States in affirming that reciprocity and fairness is an essential and vital principle of international trade.
Forget what you've heard on the news. Behind closed doors, Donald Trump's so-called UK agreement didn't level the playing field. It rigged the game for the ultra-wealthy, slamming Detroit's factories and sending shockwaves through every American neighborhood. This isn't just about tariffs. This is about who gets to win, who's left behind, and how the story you've been told is hiding the real cost, one that's about to hit home for millions. Think about it. Why are American cars still taxed at 25% while Bentleys cruise in at 10%? What does this mean for your paycheck and the price you pay at the dealer? Stay tuned. This fallout will hit closer than you think. The numbers game. When numbers lie, it's the people who pay the price. And this deal, it's a prime example. The crux of the controversy was the stark difference between the 10% tariff granted to British luxury cars and the 25% tariff that remained for American vehicles manufactured outside the United States. This disparity was not just inconvenient, it was economically damaging. Take, for instance, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a high-end luxury car from the United Kingdom. Under the new tariff rules, this vehicle would enter the U.S. market with a significantly reduced tariff, making it more affordable for American consumers, despite being a premium product. On the other hand, a Ford F-150 manufactured in Mexico would face the full brunt of the 25% tariff. The resulting price difference made the luxury import more economically viable than the widely popular American-made truck. This tariff structure directly contradicted the administration's commitment to prioritizing American manufacturing. Instead of protecting domestic production, it inadvertently favored foreign luxury brands, creating an imbalance that threatened the viability of American auto exports. Automakers like Ford and General Motors found themselves in a strategic dilemma. To maintain profitability, they would either have to absorb the cost difference or pass it on to consumers, making their products less competitive. Some companies began reconsidering their export strategies, focusing on markets where tariffs were less punitive. This reorientation threatened to reduce the American auto industry's global footprint, undermining decades of growth and investment. The backlash from the automotive sector was swift and unrelenting. Corporate leaders publicly questioned how such a deal could be justified when it so clearly disadvantaged the U.S. auto sector. Trump's administration initially defended the deal, arguing that it would foster closer ties with the United Kingdom. However, this rationale failed to resonate with workers and executives who saw their industries being undercut. Critics pointed out that while fostering international alliances is important, doing so at the expense of domestic industries is counterproductive. The economic damage was not hypothetical. It was unfolding in real time as automakers began scaling back production plans. The debate was no longer about whether the deal was beneficial, but about how much damage it would cause. The tariff disparity wasn't just a blunder, it was a deliberate decision influenced by personal preferences. But what drove this choice? To find the answer, we must look beyond the numbers and into the personal motivations behind the policy. Detroit's outrage, the big three, speak. For Detroit's automakers, the deal was more than just unfair, it was a betrayal. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis were among the first to raise the alarm. Their collective statement highlighted how the tariff disparity threatened to erode the competitive edge of American-made vehicles, especially those assembled in Canada and Mexico. In interviews, auto executives voiced their disbelief, emphasizing that this deal contradicted Trump's long-standing rhetoric of protecting American jobs and manufacturing. One executive from Ford bluntly stated, "This policy not only disadvantages our products, but also compromises the workers who build them." Such sentiments were echoed across Detroit, where factories had already been grappling with supply chain disruptions. Now they faced a direct threat to their international sales strategies. Leaked internal memos from General Motors revealed that the company anticipated significant losses if the tariff structure remained unchanged. The projected decrease in exports could result in job cuts, reduced production lines, and diminished investments in new technologies. Stellantis, which had been expanding its North American operations, now faced a dilemma: continue with planned expansions or scale back to mitigate potential financial damage. To combat the negative fallout, the automakers initiated a lobbying effort in Washington, pushing for a reevaluation of the deal. They argued that prioritizing luxury imports from the United Kingdom over American manufacturing was not just economically unsound, but politically short-sighted. Despite these efforts, the administration remained firm, insisting that the deal was necessary for broader strategic reasons. The automotive sector's frustration grew as it became clear that the deal had not been vetted with the input of industry leaders. The sense of betrayal was palpable. Not only were the tariffs damaging, but the lack of consultation also signaled a disregard for the workers, whose livelihoods depended on stable manufacturing policies. Why would Trump, known for his America First rhetoric, cut such a controversial deal? The answer, it turns out, was rooted not in economic strategy, but in personal interest. We've dug through countless reports, analyzed the numbers, and exposed the real story behind Trump's UK deal, how it's hurting American workers while giving luxury imports a free pass. If you appreciate the effort we put into breaking it down and bringing you the truth, hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the channel and stay informed. Personal intervention, Trump's role. Reports surfaced that Trump had personally intervened to reduce tariffs on luxury cars. Insiders revealed that during negotiations, Trump insisted on reducing tariffs for brands he admired, like Rolls-Royce and Bentley. The Washington Post's investigation confirmed that his personal affinity for these high-end vehicles influenced his stance, overriding economic advice from trade experts. In a statement, the White House attempted to downplay Trump's involvement, but leaked audio revealed Trump boasting about the decision, stating, "You've got to take care of your friends." This revelation fueled public outrage, as it became evident that the deal's motivations were rooted in favoritism rather than sound policy. And as public outrage brewed, the real-world consequences began to hit. 900 laid off, a factory in turmoil. When the deal was signed, it wasn't just a headline. It was the end of the line for hundreds of workers. One of the first places to feel the blow of Trump's UK trade deal was a Chrysler plant in Michigan. The factory, once bustling with life and production, faced a sudden and devastating blow. 900 workers found themselves without jobs, a direct consequence of the unexpected tariff disparity that left American automakers scrambling to maintain their financial footing. Among those affected was John, a 38-year-old assembly line worker who had spent over a decade at the plant. Just a month prior to the layoffs, John and his wife had finally bought their first home, a modest, single-story house on a quiet street. They had saved for years, working overtime to secure a stable future for their 3 children. The day John received his layoff notice, the sense of security he had fought for collapsed. John wasn't alone. Entire shifts were canceled, and the factory floor, once noisy with the hum of machinery, fell silent. Workers congregated outside, discussing what had gone wrong. Some blamed corporate mismanagement, but most pointed to the deal that had blindsided the automotive community. United Auto Workers representatives swiftly condemned the deal. In a press statement, the union described it as a betrayal of every American worker who trusted the administration to protect manufacturing jobs. Protests erupted outside the factory gates, with workers holding signs demanding justice and fair treatment. One placard read, "Jobs for Bentleys? Where's our deal?" Union leaders called for an immediate revision of the trade agreement, arguing that the tariff disparity effectively rewarded British manufacturers while crippling the U.S. auto industry. The protests grew in number and intensity, spreading from the Chrysler plant to other affected areas in Michigan. Local businesses also began to feel the pinch. Restaurants and small shops that relied on factory workers as their primary customers saw a steep decline in sales. An owner of a nearby diner, who had been serving breakfast to Chrysler employees for over 20 years, noted how empty his place had become. "It's like someone turned off a switch," he said. This wasn't just about numbers or tariffs. It was about real people suddenly losing their livelihoods. Communities that depended on these jobs found themselves grappling with uncertainty. As factories slowed, local economies suffered, triggering a cascade of financial strain. As the layoffs rippled through Michigan, the question loomed: how could a deal meant to boost American manufacturing instead put so many workers on the unemployment line? The answer wasn't just economic, it was deeply personal. Mortgage meltdown, when inflation meets layoffs. For those who invested in the American dream, this deal turned it into a nightmare. The loss of steady income for hundreds of workers like John was more than just a paycheck gap. It was the beginning of a financial spiral. Mortgage payments loomed large, and for many, it became impossible to keep up. The Chrysler layoffs had an immediate and profound impact on the local housing market, with home listings in the area doubling within weeks. Families who had just moved in were now forced to sell before falling behind on their payments. One of the hardest hit was Mary, a 34-year-old mother of two whose husband also worked at the Chrysler plant. After the layoff, Mary took up 2 part-time jobs just to keep up with the mortgage and utility bills. Her husband, once the primary breadwinner, struggled to find new employment as the auto sector in the area contracted. The strain on local social services became evident. Food banks reported a surge in demand, with many families visiting for the first time. Shelters began preparing for a potential increase in homelessness as families fell behind on their rent and mortgage payments. Community support networks tried to help, but resources were stretched thin. Economists warn that the housing downturn in affected areas could lead to a broader regional crisis. As more families faced foreclosure, property values began to drop, undermining the stability of neighborhoods that had been thriving just months before. Real estate agents noted that homes which would have sold in days now sat on the market for weeks, with some owners forced to reduce prices just to attract buyers. State and local governments scrambled to respond. Emergency housing assistance was proposed, but funding remained limited. Some called for federal intervention, arguing that the crisis was directly tied to the trade policy enacted by the Trump administration. In the meantime, families like Mary's continued to struggle, uncertain of how to rebuild after such a sudden and devastating setback. But the blow wasn't just financial. It was also political. As anger grew, the communities hit hardest by the layoffs began to question the very political foundations that had once seemed unshakable. Rural revolt, Trump's base sours. It wasn't supposed to happen, Trump's core voters turning against him. But now the tide is shifting. Rural America had long been a stronghold for Trump, particularly in Michigan, where his straightforward rhetoric and promises to revive manufacturing resonated with blue-collar voters. But the fallout from the UK trade deal began to fracture this support. Polls showed a sharp decline in approval ratings among rural voters. A survey conducted by Marist revealed that Trump's approval among rural voters dropped from 59% to 40% within months. For communities that had once seen him as a champion of American jobs, the reality of the trade deal's impact became too much to ignore. Interviews with residents in small towns revealed a growing sense of betrayal. One lifelong supporter stated, "We voted for him because he said he'd protect American jobs. Now it feels like he's selling us out to the British." This sentiment was echoed in public meetings, where once loyal supporters openly criticized the deal and called for accountability. Local Republican leaders found themselves caught between defending the president and addressing the genuine anger within their communities. While some remained loyal, hoping the president would find a way to mitigate the damage, others began to reconsider their political allegiance. The question became whether this discontent would last through the next election cycle or fade if economic conditions improved. Now it was clear that the political landscape was shifting, yet the voices of dissent were not limited to small towns. Urban centers also felt the sting of economic fallout, leading to public demonstrations that would soon catch national attention. The governor's gambit, Gillchrist strikes back. As the automotive crisis deepened, one political figure wasn't about to stay silent. Lieutenant Governor Garland Gillchrist of Michigan became a prominent voice of dissent against Trump's UK trade deal. Known for his practical approach and engineering background, Gillchrist framed the deal as a betrayal of Michigan's working-class families. In a televised statement, he condemned the deal's structure, highlighting how favoring luxury British cars over American-made vehicles was fundamentally unjust. This deal doesn't just hurt manufacturers, it devastates the families who build our cars, he declared. His critique struck a chord, especially as news of layoffs spread across Michigan. Gillchrist went beyond criticism, proposing state-level assistance to mitigate the damage. His initiatives included expanding unemployment benefits and supporting retraining programs for displaced workers. He also urged Congress to reassess the tariff structure, emphasizing that leadership meant protecting workers, not prioritizing foreign luxury brands. Some Republicans accused Gillchrist of exploiting the situation for political gain, but his pragmatic approach resonated with many. Moderate conservatives and blue-collar workers found his proposals more relatable than Trump's defense of the deal. As Gillchrist's popularity rose, His stance on defending local jobs over international agreements became a rallying point for Michigan's workforce. But while Gillchrist addressed the crisis with practical solutions, Trump's political base began to fracture. Imitators versus innovators, the GOP clone machine. When Trump sets the tone, his political imitators fall in line. But this time, it's costing them. Michigan's Republican Party, typically loyal to Trump, faced backlash as the negative effects of the trade deal became evident. Initially, GOP leaders defended the agreement, insisting it would boost the economy and strengthen ties with the United Kingdom. However, as job losses mounted, maintaining that narrative became increasingly difficult. During a heated town hall, a local Republican representative struggled to justify the deal's benefits. Laid-off workers interrupted, questioning how reduced tariffs on Rolls-Royces could help American families. The representative's vague response only fueled the crowd's frustration. Grassroots Republicans, particularly in rural areas, began voicing their doubts. One farmer openly criticized the deal, saying, "We voted for Trump to protect jobs, not to give luxury car makers a break." This sentiment echoed across the state as local party leaders struggled to maintain support. Moderate Republicans distanced themselves from the party line, expressing concern that unwavering support for Trump could alienate voters. Some quietly pushed for a reassessment of the deal, while others remained hesitant to publicly challenge the president. The divide within Michigan's GOP became more apparent as Gillchrist's worker-focused response continued to gain traction. As party leaders grappled with growing dissent, the economic fallout began impacting more than just jobs. It was threatening the well-being of families who now faced losing health care. Medicaid on the chopping block, health care in the crosshairs. When jobs disappear, healthcare often follows, and for Michigan families, the stakes couldn't be higher. As layoffs mounted, healthcare insecurity became a pressing issue. Many workers who lost their jobs at Chrysler also lost employer-sponsored health insurance. For these families, Medicaid became a critical safety net. However, Trump's proposed cuts to Medicaid added to the uncertainty. Local clinics reported an influx of patients who had recently transitioned from private insurance to Medicaid. Gillchrist addressed this growing concern, proposing emergency health care coverage for displaced workers. Losing your job shouldn't mean losing your health care, he argued. His proposal included temporary state funding to keep Medicaid accessible for laid-off workers. Healthcare professionals and community leaders praised the plan, emphasizing that cutting Medicaid during a job crisis would devastate families. However, some Republican lawmakers dismissed the proposal as financially reckless, arguing that reducing Medicaid costs was essential for economic recovery. Public sentiment, however, sided with Gillchrist. Voters expressed anger over the idea of sacrificing health care amid a wave of layoffs. The debate over Medicaid funding became a focal point in town halls, where constituents demanded that elected officials prioritize people over budget cuts. While healthcare debates raged on, another critical issue loomed: housing stability. Housing hustle. 60,000 units in 3 years. Amid economic upheaval, housing stability is a lifeline. But can Michigan build fast enough to keep up? As layoffs continued, many families faced the harsh reality of losing their homes. Mortgage payments became harder to manage, and the threat of foreclosure loomed large. In response, Gillchrist unveiled a plan to build 60,000 affordable housing units over 3 years. The initiative aimed to address the twin crises of unemployment and housing insecurity by creating jobs in construction while also providing affordable homes. By partnering with local contractors and accelerating project approvals, the state hoped to ease the housing crunch and offer stability to affected families. Some critics argued that the plan was overly ambitious and raised concerns about the quality of rapidly built housing. However, Gillchrist countered that the alternative, allowing families to face homelessness, was unacceptable. He positioned the initiative as a proactive solution rather than a mere political promise. The plan received mixed reactions, but many community members expressed hope that new housing opportunities would bring some relief. As construction began, Gillchrist visited sites to emphasize his commitment to rebuilding Michigan's economy from the ground up. While the state focused on housing recovery, the international consequences of Trump's trade deal were just beginning to take shape. European fallout and global supply chains. America's controversial deal with the United Kingdom, sent shockwaves through the European automotive industry. Under the new agreement, British luxury vehicles such as Rolls-Royce and Bentley arrived in the United States with a 10% tariff, while cars produced in the European Union still faced substantially higher duties. The resulting imbalance forced brands like BMW, Volkswagen, and Peugeot to reevaluate their transatlantic strategies. Executives at BMW, who had planned to expand exports of high-end sedans and sport utility vehicles to the United States, expressed frustration that they would now need to either absorb increased costs or cut prices to remain competitive. Volkswagen, already navigating supply chain disruptions, warned that the disparity risked undermining investments in new production lines. Peugeot, poised for a comeback in the United States market with its luxury-oriented models, found its pricing projections upended overnight. European governments swiftly took note. Trade ministers from Germany, France, and Italy convened within the European Union framework to discuss a unified response. Proposals ranged from diplomatic protests at the World Trade Organization to potential retaliatory tariffs on American goods. However, concerns about triggering a broader trade war led to a cautious approach, with leaders emphasizing dialogue over confrontation. Meanwhile, European labor unions sounded alarms that a shift of certain production to the United Kingdom, driven by more favorable tariff treatment, could jeopardize jobs in continental factories. Analysts warned that such a move would disrupt intricate cross-border supply chains, affecting everything from engine parts to electronics modules. As Europe weighed its options, the lesson was clear. A bilateral deal intended to boost one relationship had the unintended effect of destabilizing many others. Transitioning from Europe's dilemma to North America's test of solidarity, Canada and Mexico prepared their own countermoves. North American response and trade alliance tensions. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement was built on the promise of mutual prosperity. Yet Trump's preferential terms for the United Kingdom undercut that commitment. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly condemned the arrangement, declaring that it undermined Canadian auto workers who depended on unfettered access to the United States market. He cautioned that Ottawa would explore measures to protect domestic industry, including targeted tariffs on British imports or adjustments to Canada's own trade policy. In Mexico, where automotive plants in cities such as Monterrey and Hermosillo supply major United States brands, union leaders lamented a sudden competitive disadvantage. They pointed out that factories producing pickup trucks and executive sedans for export would now struggle to match the artificially lowered price of British luxury imports. Mexican business groups began lobbying for discussions within the USMCA Council to restore balance. Collectively, Canada and Mexico considered a coordinated response, weighing the economic and diplomatic risks of pushing back too hard. Some Canadian parliamentarians proposed amendments to USMCA safeguards, seeking language that would prevent any third-party deal from jeopardizing North American market access. In Mexico, policymakers debated emergency tax incentives to offset potential job losses in the auto sector. As negotiations unfolded, North American markets braced for possible escalation. The specter of a trilateral trade dispute raised fears of disrupted supply chains for parts as well as finished vehicles, an outcome that would hit manufacturers and suppliers on both sides of the border. Ultimately, Canada and Mexico balanced the need for a firm response with the desire to preserve broader trade cooperation, illustrating the fragility of alliances when unilateral deals shift the economic landscape. With allies and neighbors adjusting their strategies, financial markets turned a wary eye toward Detroit and beyond. Investor alarm and the consumer cost. When Wall Street speaks, Washington listens. News of tariff disparities and international unease triggered an immediate sell-off in major automotive stocks. Shares of Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis slipped as analysts forecast prolonged instability. Financial firms warned that hedge funds were reallocating capital to Asian and European manufacturers, anticipating that American brands would struggle under the new trade regime. Market watchers noted that the volatility also affected currency values. The United States dollar rose against the euro, reflecting safe haven flows amid fears of a global trade conflict. Economists caution that sustained uncertainty could spark inflationary pressures. Higher import costs for cars and parts, combined with potential retaliatory measures overseas, might force producers to pass expenses on to consumers. This unfolding drama translated into real concerns for everyday buyers. Dealership representatives reported inquiries about future pricing, with many shoppers wary that the sticker price on a new pickup truck could climb by several $1,000s. The cost of popular models assembled in Canada or Mexico, previously shielded by relatively low duties, now risked an increase equivalent to the full 25% tariff. Consumers faced the prospect of higher monthly finance payments or larger down payments to compensate. Routine maintenance and replacement parts were not immune. Mechanics and service shops anticipated that imported engines, transmissions, and electronic components would carry added tariff costs, raising repair bills. Owners of older vehicles, who already budgeted tightly, feared deferring essential upkeep, potentially compromising vehicle safety and longevity. Beyond pricing, the uncertainty around warranty coverage and extended service plans added another layer of complexity. If manufacturers chose to limit warranty options to offset higher costs, buyers could find themselves bearing greater financial risk over a vehicle's lifespan. Financial advisors recommended caution for prospective car purchasers, urging them to negotiate firm price guarantees and explore domestic production alternatives if possible. Public sentiment hardened as the deal's long-term consumer impact became clear. Voters began linking the economic sting of pricier cars and repairs directly to the administration's trade policies. What had begun as a high-profile agreement with the United Kingdom now loomed as a cautionary tale. When personal preferences override broad economic interests, the fallout can be global, and the true cost is eventually paid by ordinary citizens. But what do you think? Was Trump's UK deal a strategic move or a catastrophic mistake? Do you agree with how it's impacting American workers? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into today's biggest issues.